I work best on long-form writing like this in the cowork environment, but I'll write it here for you now. The thing about restoring old furniture is that it requires a kind of patience most people don't have anymore. You sit with something broken for hours, sometimes days, learning its damage before you even think about fixing it. I learned that patience from my grandmother in her workshop behind the house in Kelowna, and I carried it with me to Vancouver when I was 24, thinking I could build a life out of it. 7 years later, I had a small studio on East 12th, a waiting list of clients, and a cat named Biscuit who slept on every piece of furniture I was supposed to be restoring. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine, and I was proud of it in the quiet way you're proud of things you built alone. That was the life I had. The Thursday morning, Declan Ashford walked through my door. I heard the knock but didn't look up right away. I was in the middle of stripping varnish off a 1940s mahogany sideboard, and interruptions at that stage cost you. "It's open," I called out. The man who came in didn't belong in my workshop. That was the first thing I noticed. Not because he was tall, or because his coat probably cost more than my rent, though both of those things were true, but because he looked at the room like he was cataloging it, methodically, like he was already deciding what mattered and what didn't. "You're the one who does the restorations," he said. "Not a question. That's what the sign outside says." He walked toward the sideboard, looked at it, then looked at me. He had dark hair, going slightly gray at the temples, and eyes that were a very specific shade of gray-green that I would have called sea glass if I were being poetic, which I try not to be before noon. "My name is Declan Ashford. I need your help with something that isn't furniture." I set down my cloth. "Then you have the wrong address." "I don't think so." He reached into the inside pocket of his coat and set a photograph on my workbench. It was a painting. Small, maybe 30 by 40 centimeters, dark background, a woman in a cream dress. This was my grandmother's. It was stolen from our family home in Halifax 18 months ago. I've traced it to a private auction happening in Montreal in 11 days. The problem is that the auction is invitation only, and the invitations are extended to couples. I stared at him. "You want me to go to Montreal with you? I want you to attend as my partner. 3 days. I'll cover all expenses, accommodation, and I'll pay you $30,000. The number sat in the room between us like something that needed to be handled carefully. "Why me?" I said. "Because you know what the painting is worth. Because you know enough about provenance and restoration to talk about it convincingly if someone asks. And because my assistant spent 2 weeks finding someone who fits that profile and lives in Vancouver, and you were the name at the top of the list." I thought about the gas bill I'd been putting off, the new buffing wheel I needed, Biscuit's vet appointment that I'd rescheduled twice. "I need 24 hours, I said. He nodded once, like that was already accounted for. He left a card on my workbench and walked out, and Biscuit jumped up from behind the sideboard and sniffed it. "Don't look at me like that," I told him. I picked up the card, the Ashford Group, an address on West Georgia Street. I called my neighbor that evening, the retired school teacher downstairs who had a key to my place, and had looked after Biscuit before when I went to estate sales out of town. I told her I might need her for a few days. She said she'd be happy to, and that Biscuit was better company than most people she knew, which I took as a compliment by proxy. Then I sat on my kitchen floor with a glass of wine and looked up Declan Ashford. The Ashford Group was a private investment firm, established 1987, headquartered in Vancouver with offices in Toronto, Montreal, and London. The kind of company that doesn't have a flashy website because it doesn't need to attract clients. Clients come to them. Declan was the second generation, had taken over from his father 8 years ago after his father's death, and had in that time expanded the company's portfolio considerably. There were also some older articles, the kind that appear and disappear quickly, that referenced disputes with a rival firm out of Toronto. The language was careful, but the implication was not. These were not people who resolved disagreements in boardrooms. I told myself that was old news. I called him back at 9:30 and told him I'd do it. He sent a car the following Monday. I'd packed the way I always pack. Practically, with one thing that's slightly nicer than everything else in case I need it. In this case, a dark green wrap dress. I'd bought for a wedding 3 years ago and worn exactly once. I brought it because he'd mentioned a dinner on the second night, and I didn't want to give him anything else to organize. The driver didn't speak, which I respected. We flew out of YVR on a private flight, which I had never done before, and which I spent most of pretending was not impressive. Declan was already on the plane. He had documents in front of him and a coffee that looked like it had gone cold, and he didn't look up when I sat down across from him. He slid a folder across the table. "Cover story," he said. "We met 2 years ago through a mutual friend in the art world. You've been consulting for my firm on acquisitions. We've been together since last spring." I opened the folder. There were printed notes, backstory, details, timeline. The mutual friend was a real person, a gallery owner in Toronto, in case anyone checked. "You've done this before," I said. "Had someone do this research?" "Yes. Attended an event with someone you hired to be there." He looked up at me then, for the first time since I'd sat down. Something in his expression shifted slightly, like he was recalibrating. "Once," he said, 4 years ago. Different situation." I didn't ask what situation. The folder had enough information in it. "We landed in Montreal mid-afternoon. The hotel was on Sherbrooke, the kind of place with a doorman who used your last name before you'd introduced yourself, because someone had already told him. Our suite had 2 bedrooms and a shared sitting room, and Declan seemed entirely unbothered by the arrangement, which made it easier for me to be unbothered too. The first evening was quiet. He ordered room service and worked. I read and eventually fell asleep on the sitting room sofa, which I didn't intend to do, and woke at midnight to find a blanket had been placed over me. I looked around, but the light under his bedroom door was off. The auction preview was the following afternoon, at a venue in Old Montreal, a converted warehouse with the bones of something industrial and the surface of something expensive. We arrived together and I took his arm at the door, because it seemed like the right thing to do in that context, and I felt him go very slightly still for a half-second before he adjusted. The room was full of people who were being very careful about how relaxed they appeared. I know that type. I grew up around enough money to recognize people who have it, and are performing not caring about it. Declan moved through the space with a quality I can only describe as contained. He was not nervous, but he was not comfortable either. He was working. The painting was in the 3rd room, hung between 2 larger pieces that probably had more provenance but less emotional weight. I stood in front of it for a long moment. It was good. Not masterpiece level, but genuinely skilled. The kind of work that gets undervalued because it doesn't have a famous name attached, and then gets lost in private collections for generations. The woman in the cream dress had a quality to her that was hard to name. Present, I thought. She looked like she was actually in the room with the painter, not posing for them. "Your grandmother's?" I asked quietly. "Her mother's originally," he said, standing beside me. "She brought it from Scotland when she emigrated in 1953. It hung in the front hallway of every house we lived in until I was 15. He said it without sentiment, just facts, but the kind of facts a person has memorized because they needed to hold on to them somewhere. "How did it get taken?" "Someone my father trusted." He said it simply. "Someone who knew the house." I didn't say anything. There wasn't anything to say to that. That evening was the dinner. I wore the green dress. Declan wore a dark suit and a tie he'd clearly chosen without thinking about it, which suited him better than anything deliberate would have. The dining room was full and the seating had been arranged to maximize the mixing of guests. I found myself beside a woman from Toronto who collected mid-century Quebecois art and had opinions about it, which I genuinely appreciated, and we talked for 40 minutes before she turned to her other neighbor and I turned back to Declan. "You're good at this," he said, low enough that only I could hear. "Talking to people? Making them feel like you're interested." "I am interested," I said. "She's interesting." He looked at me sideways. "You're not performing." "No." He was quiet for a moment. "That's unusual, at events like this. For you?" "For most people here." We left the dinner at 10 and walked a few blocks before flagging a cab, because the air was cool and clear and walking felt right. He didn't offer his arm this time because we weren't performing for anyone, but we walked close enough that our shoulders nearly touched a few times, and neither of us moved away. Back in the suite, He poured 2 glasses of water from the kitchen and handed me one, and we stood at the window for a while looking at the street below. "The painting goes to auction tomorrow at 2, he said. "There are 2 other parties I've identified who may be bidding against us." "How do you know?" "I know one of them. The other is harder to read." He paused. "There may be a problem." "What kind?" "The kind that suggests the auction isn't entirely legitimate. That one or both of the other bidders know the painting's provenance has a gap and are moving to acquire it before a claim can be registered." I looked at him. "How long have you known this?" "I suspected it before we came. I confirmed it this afternoon. Someone on the preview staff recognized me." "Not as your partner." "As someone connected to the original family." I set my water glass down. "So, our cover is blown, possibly, which means tomorrow may not go as planned." I thought about that. What does not as planned look like? It means we may need to leave quickly. And it means I need to tell you something I should have told you before you agreed to come. I waited. He sat down on the arm of the chair, which was an oddly informal thing for him to do, and it made him look suddenly less composed. "The people behind this auction have a connection to the group that stole the painting in the first place. The same group my father had dealings with, years ago. That ended badly. They've been trying to acquire assets that belonged to my family for the better part of a decade. The painting is one of them. There are others." "What kind of dealings?" I said carefully. He met my eyes. "My father made choices I wouldn't have made. He got involved with people he shouldn't have trusted. When he tried to pull back, things became complicated. When he died, those complications transferred to me." He said it steadily, but I could hear the weight in it. "I'm not my father, but I've spent 8 years dealing with the consequences of things he did, and this painting is one of the loose ends I'm trying to close." The room was very quiet. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked. "Because you deserve to know what you've walked into, and because I think you'll make better decisions with the full picture than without it." I thought about the photograph he'd placed on my workbench, the careful, methodical way he'd moved through the preview that afternoon, the way he'd stood in front of that painting and recited its history like he'd rehearsed it in the dark. "Okay," I said. "So what do we do tomorrow?" He looked at me for a long moment, like my question was something he needed to take apart to understand. "You don't have to be there," he said. "I can arrange for you to leave in the morning, and your payment still stands regardless." "I know I don't have to be there." I picked up my water glass again. "That's not what I asked." Something shifted in his expression. Small but unmistakable. "Then we go to the auction. We bid. If it goes wrong, we leave fast. There's a car I'll have standing by. If anyone approaches you directly, you don't answer questions. You find me. And if I can't find you, then you go to the car. The driver's name is Hugh. He knows what to do." I nodded. He nodded. We went to bed, separately, and I lay in the dark for a long time listening to the city and thinking about a painting of a woman in a cream dress who'd crossed an ocean in someone's luggage and ended up on the wall of every house Declan Ashford had ever lived in as a child. I didn't sleep until almost 4. The auction room was smaller than I'd expected. 40 chairs, 24 lots, a calm-voiced auctioneer with a Quebecois accent who treated each lot like a medical diagnosis, precise and without drama. Declan and I sat toward the middle. He'd given me a number card and told me to hold it up when he nodded. The painting came up 8th. I recognized the 2 men he'd identified. One because Declan had described him. One because I'd seen him linger near the painting during the preview, with the specific quality of someone who thinks they've already won. They were seated on opposite sides of the room, which probably meant they didn't know about 2000. The auction started at voice didn't change. 48. 55. 60. 60. 68. Declan nodded. I raised the card. 72. The man I recognized pushed it to 78. The other bidder dropped out at 80. Declan's jaw tightened slightly. I kept my eyes on him. 85. 90, 94, $94,000. I have never bid on anything more expensive than a Victorian vanity table. Declan nodded once more. 100,000. The room was very still. The man across from us looked at his phone. Something in his posture changed. He shook his head. "Sold," said the auctioneer, with no particular inflection. I didn't let myself react. Declan put his hand over mine briefly. Warm, deliberate. And then we were moving, processing the paperwork, and I was standing in a side hallway while he signed things, and the man who'd been bidding against us walked past and looked at me with an expression that was not angry, but was something colder than that. And I looked back at him steadily until he looked away. Hugh had the car at the side entrance. The painting, packaged for transport, went in the back. We were moving before I fully processed that it was over. Declan let out a slow breath. "You didn't look nervous," I said. "I was. What does nervous look like for you?" "A lot like not nervous." He glanced at me. "You held the number up like you did that every week. I do restoration estimates every week. It's not that different." He almost smiled. It was the first time I'd seen anything close to it. We flew back that evening. The painting was loaded separately, under insurance documentation that Declan's assistant had apparently spent 2 weeks arranging. I sat across from him again on the plane, but neither of us opened any folders this time. Somewhere over northern Ontario, I asked him what he was going to do with it. "Put it back where it belongs," he said. "There's a wall in my house in Halifax that's been empty for 8 years. "Your dad's house?" "Mine now. I've been slowly taking it back from what he left there." He looked out the window at nothing. "Every room has something that needs to change. I've been working through it." I thought about that, restoring something to what it was, starting with the damage and working outward. "That I understand," I said. He looked at me then, and something in his face was quieter than it had been since I'd met him. Not soft, exactly, but open in a way that cost him something. We landed in Vancouver at 11:30. Hugh drove us separately, me first. I expected the trip to end there, efficiently, the way things like this are supposed to end. Handshake, transfer of funds, thank you and goodbye. Instead, Declan got out of the car with me. "I'll have the payment sent to your account by Friday," he said. "That's fine." He paused, in the way of someone who has already decided something, but is giving themselves one more moment before they say it out loud. "I'd like to have dinner with you, not as a client, not as whatever this was." I looked at him for a moment. The street was quiet. It had rained while we were gone, and the pavement reflected the streetlights in a way that made everything look like it was being seen through glass. "I should tell you," I said, "that I'm not particularly good at easy." "Neither am I. I keep strange hours, I get absorbed in things. I have a cat who takes up more space than is reasonable for his size. I have a house in Halifax with a lot of empty walls," he said. "I work too much, and I'm not good at asking for things I need. We'd probably frustrate each other constantly." "Probably," I agreed. He held my gaze. "Is that a yes?" I thought about patience, about learning something's damage before you try to fix it, about the fact that some things are worth sitting with. "Call me next week," I said. He nodded. He got back in the car. I watched the taillights until they turned the corner. Upstairs, I unlocked my door. Biscuit was waiting on the other side with the particular energy of a cat who has opinions about being left for 3 days and is about to communicate all of them. I picked him up and he complained into my shoulder. "I know," I said. "Me too." I set him down, filled his bowl, and stood at my kitchen window for a while, looking at the wet street and the dark mountains at the edge of the city. Somewhere over the Atlantic, a long time ago, a woman had carried a small painting onto a ship and taken it somewhere she hoped would be better. It had ended up in a hallway where a boy had walked past it every morning until he was 15. And then it had gone missing. And then it had come back, and now it would hang on a wall in Halifax, in a house that someone was slowly, carefully, making into something it was supposed to be. Some things take time. That's not a flaw. That's just how they work. I turned off the kitchen light and went to bed, and for the first time in as long as I could remember, I wasn't awake when the city went quiet.